gonna go ahead and get started right here at 5. So I am Celeste, the Administrative Coordinator for the Equality State Policy Center, and welcome to People's Review Live, hosted by us, ESPC. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to improve all of Wyoming people's lives through transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. The People's Review Live is designed to help people across Wyoming engage with government and keep up with important issues and debates. Well, when we work together, we can ensure transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. And this has never been more important than right now. This event is made possible by the generous support of the People's Review Live Leadership Circle members, Marcia Constell, Joe Albright, Joanne Skyam True and Shane True, and Mike Shaughnessy and Kathy Jenkins, and an anonymous donor. If you'd like to know how to become a Leadership Circle member, please email me. I'll drop that in the chat in just a moment. And before we get too deep, I'd like to give a little bit of housekeeping and a recap of the format. So we're in a webinar format right now, so you should be able to see and hear our lovely panelists. Everybody give a wave. And we'll be able to answer your questions through the chat. So please drop those in the chat as we go along this evening. We'll do our best to address them all. And if for some reason you can't hear or see someone or having any issues, just go ahead and shoot me a message and I'll try to do my best to help. And with that, I will jump over to Jen Lowe, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Celeste. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's great to have so many of you here, and I'm so excited. We have just an outstanding panel of speakers, and I don't want to waste any time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing Marcia Shanor. Marcia is the Executive Director of the Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association and current chair of the Equality State Board of Directors. She has more than 30 years of experience in nonprofit work, including organizing and lobbying in Wyoming. Marcia will discuss tonight the importance of the judiciary during the panel discussion, including updating us on Senate File 26, judge positions authorization, and funding which passed during this session. Welcome, Marcia. Next, I'd like to introduce Tate Mullen. Tate is a fourth-generation Wyomingite, and he is the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. Born in Cheyenne and raised in Casper, in 2014, he received his master's degree in political science from the University of Wyoming, where he was awarded the Outstanding Political Science Award. Tate also attended the University of Colorado, Denver, and completed coursework in their Masters of Public Policy, Public Administration program. During this same time, Tate worked as a budget and policy analyst for Jefferson County, Colorado. Tate currently serves as the Government Relations Director of the Wyoming Education Association, in case you didn't get that the first time. Great to see you, Tate. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Next, I'd like to introduce Sara Burlingame. Sara is the Executive Director at Wyoming Equality and a former representative for Wyoming House District 44. She has a background in faith organizing and that centers on racial and socioeconomic justice. Sara is proud to identify as a scrappy trailer park kid who made good. She lives with her husband, Jason Thomas, and their two darling barbarian children, Atticus and Emerson, in South Cheyenne. As always, it's great to have you, Sara. Thank you. And next, I'd like to introduce Connie Wilbert. Connie is a lifelong Wyoming resident, originally from Riverton and now living in Laramie. Connie holds an MS in wildlife biology, and over the course of her career has worked as a habitat biologist, policy advisor, energy efficiency consultant, and environmental advocate. Connie remains committed to doing everything possible to protect our climate future, clean energy, and biodiversity as we move to more stable and sustainable energy and economic future that works for everyone. So thank you all for joining us tonight. To kick off the conversation tonight, I'm going to give each of the panelists a few minutes to just go over the issues and the topics that were most important to them during the 2022 budget session. And I'm going to go ahead and let Marcia start this conversation. So Marcia, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. I thought I would, well, first of all, I will just say WTLA, the Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association, worked on many, many issues. Some of them are of interest just to a very narrow group of folks with family law, criminal law, et cetera. And so I chose to spend a little bit of time talking about the judiciary. And before I do that, I just wanted to share a couple of things about the Trial Lawyers Association, because I think we may not be as familiar to some of you as maybe the other organizations that our panelists are going to talk about. We provide legal education and resources for attorneys. We're a professional organization for lawyers. And as well as doing those sorts of things for the members of our organization, we also work to protect the legal system, equal access to trial by jury and trial by jury. We also strive to uphold and to protect the Constitution of the US and the Wyoming Constitution, and to make sure that the rights that are described in those documents are protected for all of us. And as you know, the judiciary is a component of our legal system, and the judicial branch is the third branch of government. It's there to help keep us all balanced. It administers justice according to the laws that are passed by the Congress and by our state legislatures. The courts apply the laws, settle disputes, and also sentence those who break laws, which you know, criminal laws. It upholds the peace, order, and good government. And we look to the judiciary to protect our rights, and governments look to the courts to interpret laws and to determine constitutionality of those laws. I wanted to mention the 6th and 7th Amendments to the US Constitution because they are very important to our legal process, and I don't think we hear about them as often as we hear about the 1st and 2nd Amendments sometimes. The 6th Amendment guarantees that all criminal prosecutions are entitled to a speedy trial. They guarantee an impartial jury, and they guarantee the right to a lawyer. And the 7th Amendment guarantees the right to a jury trial in civil cases, and actually states that in controversies where the value is in excess of $20, you're entitled to a jury trial. And so that is a big right that is often under attack, and we work very hard in our legislature to protect it. Also, a component of the legal system is the judges, or are the judges that work in that system, and having qualified judges is an important part of the legal system. Judges can take away your life. We have the death penalty still in Wyoming, so they can sentence you to death. They can take away your liberty by sentencing you to jail. They can take away your children if things are not going well in the home. They can determine where children land in a custody dispute. They can divide your assets. They help in business disputes and a myriad of other kinds of decision making. They have great power, and it's very important that we have qualified judges and that we have enough judges to make those decisions. SF 26 was one of the bills that we focused on this legislative session. It provided funding for 3 new judges. Excuse me. It provides 3 new judges, one in the 3rd Judicial District, which serves Lincoln, Sweetwater, and Uinta counties. Also in the 7th Judicial District, which is Natrona County, and then authorizes a judge in the 6th Judicial District, which is Campbell County. Campbell County doesn't have courtroom facilities yet to house a judge, so there was no funding for that judge. But we are going to get 2 new judges, and that's an important issue, which many of us probably don't think about. But hearings like just a simple adoption hearing, changing your name hearing, we're having waits of up to 6 months. Civil cases like a car crash case or settling those kinds of disputes we're having a 2-year wait in some of those judicial districts. So adding a judge was important for the efficiency and settling disputes in a timely way. And I'll just end my comments by saying we should all know our judges. Judges are appointed in Wyoming by our governor. The governor receives 3 names from the Judicial Nominating Commission, and then he appoints judges, district court judges, and Supreme Court judges. At the end of their terms, though, we vote to retain them. And as I just talked about, they make pretty important decisions. So you should know your judges. Hopefully you don't have to appear before them, but you should know them, and be sure that you feel that they're qualified and doing the job that you want them to when you vote to uphold them. It only takes a simple majority of yes votes and a judge will remain in a seat. So thanks, and I'll look forward to answering any questions that you might have and to further panel discussion with everyone else.
Thanks, Marcia. Tate, you want to go ahead and take over?
Absolutely, appreciate it. So there were the 2 biggest topics for the Wyoming Education Association. For those of you who don't know, the Wyoming Education Association is a member-based organization that has about 6,000 members across the state of Wyoming, including education support staff, as well as educators, community college professors, and the like. The two big ones for us were, of course, the external cost adjustment. So the external cost adjustment within state statute, section 2113.309, section O, mandates that the cost of education be adjusted for inflation. There are 4 specific indices that are utilized. So they look at materials, they look at utilities, non-professional salaries, and professional salaries. And there's an outside professional, Dr. Christina Stoddard is the one who conducted the study this go around, looking at some of the measures both outside of the state of Wyoming and inside the state of Wyoming. Is how they determine the value of those indices for inflation. Why is this important? Well, for a few reasons. First and foremost, we are losing our competitive edge in terms of salaries across the state of Wyoming and attracting and retaining the type of high quality educators that make our education system so successful. We have lost ground to many of the surrounding states, especially the state south of us, Colorado, as well as Utah. We are losing the ability to keep our high quality educators here, and they are moving to those states to teach. So this external cost adjustment provides a necessary inflation adjustment to provide extra dollars for those salaries, as well as those other indices. Dr. Christina Stoddard came in well before our inflation across the state had hit above the 7%, which is a pretty high inflation rate. And her recommendation went before the interim joint education committee. And ultimately their recommendations. So the Joint Education Committee will make the recommendation to the Joint Appropriations Committee, which then moves this through the process during the budget session. The Joint Education Committee recognized that if we were to just take Dr. Christina Stoddard's recommendation, it would have left us at the status quo, where we are still at that losing ground to these other states. And the Joint Education Committee had the foresight to provide a substantial external cost adjustment. You know, we have seen this for a number of other professions. We've heard the governor's office talk about it. We've heard the legislature talk about snowplow drivers, highway patrol. The fact that we know that the state across the board is not really providing the necessary salaries to keep the good laborers and workers here. So they provided a substantial external cost adjustment. That went to the Joint Appropriations Committee as a recommendation. Joint Appropriations Committee, unfortunately, took what was well over a $70 million recommendation for an external cost adjustment, provided only an external cost adjustment for utilities and materials, a single year $10 million external cost adjustment. This is a substantial problem for education in a number of other areas, because what we have seen our educators experience on top of everything else, everybody has endured the pandemic. We had our teachers and students in the classrooms at a far earlier time than anybody else did. They were asked to do something that had never been done before. They showed up. They completed that work, even though they did not know how to complete that work within a pandemic. We had substitute shortages, so we've lost planning time. We've had learning loss. And then add on top of it all the inflammatory rhetoric at school board meetings and the attacks on education and educators in general. The state of Wyoming and educators in the state of Wyoming are experiencing the very thing that we are seeing at the national level. There is substantial burnout, and we have a good large number of educators in the state of Wyoming who are ready to walk away from the profession altogether. We already have a teaching shortage within the state of Wyoming. This would just compound it. So this was and is a substantial issue for educators across the state of Wyoming. The other one, of course, and I hate to even speak life into the term, but the critical race theory bills. There were a number of them. Senate File 103, which was the education limitations on teaching critical race theory, was Senator McCowan's bill. That did go through the Senate. However, when we testified on it in the Senate Education Committee, it did come out of there in an amended form that was it was kind of a paper tiger. It was a statement. It wouldn't have done anything, but then once it hit second and third reading, it was amended to be even worse than when it came out. That one did not get introduced on the House side. Thankfully, we had House Bill 97, which was Representative Gray's bill, but probably the biggest one out there and the one that caught all the headlines was Senate File 62. This bill is, we term it a national bill. And the reason that we term it a national bill is I don't know how much understanding there is about the process that some of these political organizations and think tanks utilize. Now, this was released by former State Superintendent Jillian Balow, along with Senate leadership. But there is some eerily similar language. In some portions, it's verbatim of this bill to 17 other bills in states across the US. What happens is whether you're talking about the Cato Institute or ALEC or FPA, what they will do is they will craft these template bills. They will send them to states where they think that there's an opportunity for them to pass that particular legislation. And once they do that, if they have enough states that will pass that particular legislation, that then becomes the breeding ground and an opportunity for those organizations to influence education policy at the federal level. So it's this build-up effort. We had reached out to a couple of the sponsors of the bill and said, hey, we would like to be involved in the process to discuss this bill and see if there's an opportunity for us to amend this thing to make it a little bit more palatable, because it did create a substantial amount of work for our educators who are already overworked, as well as bypassing the state standards setting and review process. And it would have mandated through legislation what would have been taught. And it was a very a la carte selective approach to what should have been taught. One of the things that, one of the benefits of the Wyoming Education Association is our strength in numbers and our engaged membership. We ultimately ended up having a substantial number of educators from across the state of Wyoming come and testify in opposition to Senate File 62 in the House Education Committee, where it failed to pass by a very, very narrow vote. The last thing that I'll talk about moving forward, we are, the interim topics that we are looking at. One of the proposals that we did get approved for, and that was also proposed by Chairman Paxton on the Education Committee, was the idea of attract and retain. I know that there are some folks that are remiss to think that there is some other way aside from dollars that we can remedy that problem. But the fact of the matter is that is probably one of the most substantial components. So we are working with the University of Wyoming on a statewide study that looks at retention and burnout amongst teachers. We have been doing our own research. We have a couple of other data points that we will be able to share with the committee in moving forward with this. But those were our significant ones. This was not a horrible session for education. I think we felt pretty organized, and I feel like we came out on top, but we still have work to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Tate, and thanks for your work during the session. I know I saw you at the Capitol quite a bit, as well as Sara Burlingame, who I saw at the Capitol quite a bit during this session. You want to tell us about your work?
Do I? Yeah, thanks. And thanks everybody for hopping on a Thursday evening to hear more about the legislature. I feel like ESPC must have really thought about their pacing of this. Like, when is it so late that people are like, I can't care anymore? But when is it too early that we're just like, I'm all filled up with what I can hear about the Wyoming legislature. Great timing, ESPC. Yeah, so the bills that Wyoming Equality, we follow everything that touches on reproductive justice and freedom, right? And we weigh in on those. Our board and our mission is very clear that reproductive freedom, which is not just the right to have an abortion or not have an abortion, but everything that touches on it, right? This idea that can you support your family. So that's Medicaid expansion, right? Like we're part of the Healthy Wyoming Coalition. And so we worked on that. We worked to get our members mobilized around saying, hey, this is why it matters to LGBTQ voters in Wyoming to have access to healthcare. And Wyoming Equality is making a pretty big investment in the next couple of years in health equity. So yes, it's Medicaid expansion, but it's also just equitable access across the board. So reproductive freedom, we were looking at those bills, we were having conversations about them. Anything that touches on the classroom, anything that touches on libraries right now is of particular interest to us, just because we see those as ways that people are either trying to decrease opportunities, decrease civil liberties for LGBTQ Wyomingites, whether it's through the library door or the schoolroom door. Those are all ways where we lose freedom if we're not part of those conversations. And I think Tate was probably just leaving this to, because he knew I was going to hit on SF 51, but of course we really appreciated that, you know, all the folks in education were paying attention and weighing in. On Senate File 51, which was the big bill that we had that we knew was coming in front of us, and then the sort of sneak attack of the appropriations amendment that intended to use the budget to strip out all funding for gender studies at the University of Wyoming. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. No one expects that the appropriations will say in the equality state, you know, just after we've celebrated 150 years of, you know, suffrage and Wyoming being the first state to acknowledge women's right to vote, that they would take a run at completely cutting funding for the gender studies as a field at the university. But that happened. And hopefully that folks will just understand that as yet another way that for some people who have ideological issues with lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirited, transgender, queer, asexual people in Wyoming living their lives, having the same access to equality and freedom and everyday things that we enjoy as Wyomingites, that this was another way to kind of take a run at that and see if they couldn't limit our freedom, because gender studies is inclusive of queer studies, right? It's one place where we talk about what is the history, what is the life experience, you know, how do queer people in America, in Wyoming, in the West experience the world, and to do it through an academic lens. That was also present. And luckily got kind of, you know, amended out to, maybe we'll do a study and say, what are prerequisites? Because that was one of the open questions that came out. There was some wild misinformation that was thrown out that was kind of shocking in those first days when they said, well, we should get rid of this program because it cost $1.5 million and it only has 5 students. That's too much. Oh.
That's okay. You know what, I'm going to go ahead and let Connie give us a little introduction while Sara takes care of the dogs.
Okay, I'd be glad to do that. Jen, do you want me to pause when she comes back? Oh, she is back, and just let her wrap up, or okay, we'll do that.
To be fair, the UPS person came and like, that makes my dogs insane. Like, that is, apologies guys. Oh, she's looking so nice and innocent now. So naughty. Yes, gender studies department, you know, taking a run because it was inclusive of queer studies. But the big, you know, bill that was in front of us was Senate File 51. And so Senate File 51 was called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. And from its name, from its inception, everything about it was deeply, deeply problematic. And it was problematic on a policy level, but I just want to be very candid and say, it was hard on a personal level. It was brought by a dear friend of mine, Senator Schuler. You know, she and I came in together as freshmen. I consider her a good, close friend. And it was hard to be on opposite sides of something that was so painful, I think, to both of us. So that bill sought to say that from like preschool through universities, no transgender woman or girl could compete in sports that aligned with her gender identity. And from the very beginning, I just want to do like a shout out and a thank you to the reporters, because from the second that it came out, you know, they were sort of asking the right questions, which is, why is this bill needed in Wyoming? You know, what is the source? And finding out immediately that, well, it's not. And even, you know, Senator Schuler herself said, I heard that there, you know, there was an issue with girls in Evanston who were playing sports in Utah. And they had this issue in Utah. I was like, well, can't write a bill in Wyoming to solve a problem in Utah. And, you know, the reporters also saying, like, how do we handle this in Wyoming? And coming out early and clearly with the Wyoming High School Activities Association has a policy, and it's had this policy for over 8 years, and it serves us well, and it allows for all the things that we say are important to us in Wyoming. Local control is important. Equity, access, and education is important. The Wyoming High School Activities Association, and I'll link it down here when Connie's talking so you can see it in the chat. So you can read the policy for yourself and see how it's really, when Wyoming is at our best, we create policies like this. And it's a policy that says everyone should have the opportunity to compete. Transgender kids, all kids. Sports is more about just winning medals. Sports is about being part of a team. It's about what we offer, right? And when we say access to education, we mean all this stuff too. Learning character, learning how to lose. That's a big one. Some of us are still learning that. You know, these are really important. These are important. You can't like put everything on like a sort of benchmark, like what you gain from participating in sports. And so everyone should have the access to that. But then it also says there's got to be a fair playing field. It's not fair if some people have this intense advantage that other people don't have. And so if that's happening, right, like say you have a transgender girl who's been through male puberty and you know, is a minor, so they're not on any sort of like puberty blockers or anything else, and they have this clear advantage, well, you should be able to have some redress for that. And so they do. So it creates a commission. And like I said, I'll link that. You can read it for yourself and you can see how fair and even handled it is. And then you can ask yourself, what was wrong with that? Why wasn't that good enough? And like Tate was saying, right, about other national bills, you know, the language of sort of boilerplate bills that really light up the amygdala, right? Get people like fired up, feeling like this outrage, this is so unfair. Like, what is being done to us? Is it good policy? No, it's terrible policy. But man, does it light up the sort of sense of outrage. And on the other end of it, of course, and it's super hard for me to talk about it. And I'll tell you, like in this conversation about the gender studies being defunded potentially, and transgender girls being kept out of sports in Wyoming, I was talking to a friend whose opinion I really value and trust. And she was saying, you know, they're both really bad, Sara, but think of how many more people are impacted by this gender studies one than SF51. I mean, how many transgender girls do we have playing sports in Wyoming, the least populated state in the union, you know? So, you know, if one had to go through, wouldn't it be better that it would be the one who affected the fewer amount of people, which is logical on its face. And I think I hadn't really recognized like why this one was like the hill I will die on. and why it's so important. And it's so important for everyone to get involved with it and to really name this as like our value as Wyomingites, that we protect children. And it was just that, you know, gender studies was a blow to academic freedom, to the hundreds and hundreds of students who take it, to the faculty who, you know, work their hearts out to teach it so well. It affects all of them. And, you know, would certainly have just horrifying impact if it were to come through. But everybody would still live at the end of the day. And we can't say the same thing about SF51. Like, it's not somewhere down the road, this would have this kind of impact that you could link to suicide, but rather today, we know that transgender kids in Wyoming are struggling to stay alive, and they are struggling to believe that they have a place on this earth in this state. And if the Wyoming legislature uses like our might and our authority to tell them, you can't be in sports, sports aren't for you. If their coaches and their teachers and their teammates have to say, this isn't for you, you're over there, you have a really hard time saying your life has the same worth, it has the same value, it has the same dignity as every other student's. And we know that there's a direct link to that in suicide. And so SF51 and bills like it, they can't pass in Wyoming. They can't. The cost, the cost is one that we can't get back. We can't get a do-over for. Thank
you, Sara. I would like to point out that the Utah governor recently vetoed a similar bill that passed through the Utah legislature, and he wrote a letter, and it's really heartfelt. So if you have the time and the interest, I highly recommend tracking down that letter and reading it. I think it really reflects some important values. So we can come back, but can we get Connie a chance to talk about her conservation issues?
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Sara. So I'll be quick here. I'll be as quick as I can so that we have time for some questions at the end of these presentations. I'll start by saying hi to everyone. I'm super glad to be here and really appreciate being invited to be part of this panel discussion. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Laramie on the ancestral homelands of Cheyenne, Arapaho, Sioux, and Crow peoples. I also want to mention that I'm director of Sierra Club Wyoming, which is a fact that I somehow forgot to include in my bio. I'm not sure what I was thinking right then, but and of course, I just want to preface my focus on a few bills that we were interested in this session by saying that we recognize that climate change is the true crisis that affects literally everything that all of us care about. And so in that context, we are very, very interested in legislation that's designed to prop up fossil fuels and extend the time that we use them. And what I'm going to do very quickly is just touch on 4 different bills, that 2 of which are related to fossil fuel tax issues and 2 that are sort of more traditional environmental conservation wildlife bills. And then I'd love to answer any questions that y'all have afterwards. Excuse me. So the first bill that I'm going to mention is one of the wildlife bills. It's the Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust funding. This was included in the budget bill and it did pass. We were very happy about that, because when the Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust was established in 2005, we actually thought it would take a few years to reach full funding of $200 million, which is an amount that will generate enough interest to support many wildlife habitat improvement projects across the state. As it turned out, it's taken 17 years to get the trust fully funded, but we finally achieved it this year, and that's a big win for Wyoming wildlife now and into the future. The second bill I'm going to touch on quickly is Senate File 84, which is the federal mineral royalty refund bill. We opposed this bill and thankfully it failed. It would have used state revenue to reimburse oil, gas, and coal corporations millions of dollars for any future increases in federal mineral royalty rates. The bill was passed by the Senate, but the House Minerals Committee heard lots and lots of testimony and opposition over 2 days of hearings, and ultimately they tabled the bill, which effectively killed it for this session. The reality is there's no evidence that raising federal royalty rates would affect production of minerals, and a recent study by the Department of Interior found that raising federal rates would not have a significant impact on production. It's worth noting that federal mineral royalty rates have not been raised since 1920. That is right, over 100 years ago. And they are considerably lower than current state and private mineral royalty rates. So we would argue that it's okay to raise the federal mineral royalty rate. And if it is raised sometime in the future, the state should certainly not find a workaround to reimburse big mineral corporations for those taxes. That just costs the state money. The second mineral tax bill that I wanted to mention was House Bill 105, the coal severance tax reduction bill. This bill did unfortunately pass. It lowers the state severance tax rate on coal, surface coal that is, from 7% to 6.5%. And while 0.5 percentage point may not sound like much, in fact, this bill will cost Wyoming an estimated $26.5 million over the next 3 years, with no known benefit or value for Wyoming residents. Studies have consistently shown that this lower tax rate will not increase coal production or jobs. All it does is further enrich coal executives and shareholders and reduce state revenue. Finally, the last bill I just wanted to highlight was the second wildlife bill, the sage-grouse game bird farming bill that y'all may have heard of. This bill will allow privately owned sage-grouse farms to continue operating for another 5 years. Wyoming has a long, strong, and very proud tradition against privatization of wildlife and private game farming. And when this sage-grouse farming project was set up 5 years ago as a pilot project, many people were really concerned. As it turned out, the last 5 years of private sage-grouse farming has showed no value to wild sage-grouse conservation, but proponents still wanted to extend the program permanently with no sunset date. Fortunately, there was very strong public opposition to this proposal, which caused the legislature to amend the bill and reinsert a new sunset date that is 5 years from now. So the program will continue, but at this point, it will expire in 2027, and we will be watching this closely to see if there are opportunities to end this program earlier. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to Jen and have some time for some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie, and actually thank all of you. So much happened during this session. It's a little bit overwhelming how many bills were introduced over 4 weeks, let alone the redistricting and the budgeting, which was constitutionally mandated. So I know each and every one of us really worked hard, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. This was my first session in the Wyoming State Legislature, so I don't have the greatest perspective on how it compares historically. But Marcia, I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about some of the differences that you noticed this year from previous sessions.
I will be happy to point out a couple of things that I noticed. First of all, even though it looked to be a large number of individual bills that were filed, it actually was far less than some budget sessions, which I appreciated. Many times we have double what was there this year. So I think there was some effort to focus, whether it worked or not, on redistricting and the budget. There were fewer bills. I appreciated that. One thing that I think for people who are relatively new to this process is the ability to go to the Legislative Services website and really see what is going on. That is, it feels still new to me, even though I know it's been around maybe even now for, I don't know, Sara and Connie, maybe 10 years. But it used to be, if you were not in that building, you did not know what was going on. And sometimes when you were in the building, you still did not know what was going on. It was hard to find where committees were going to meet. You had to wait until the end of the day and go look on the doors where committees meet and see the agendas there. And sometimes when you got there the next day, those agendas might not be there anymore or might be completely different. So the ability to see what is going on and the ability to actually watch with video streaming and YouTube, YouTube recordings is great. The recordings are amazing, right? You can go and hold somebody totally accountable for something they said on the floor, or send out that recording, links to that recording, which I have done to show people how people are talking about the legal system or other issues that you have heard talked about today. That's a pretty amazing tool, and one that ESPC is going to be working on to ensure that we have in the future. And the last thing I'll say is there has been there's always been a few people who aren't civil, who are rude, who are not honest in the Wyoming legislature. I've been around here longer than I can even believe. But I think as you're probably reading in the newspaper, there is a greater and greater lack of civility for individual legislators, for people who participate in the process like me, and regular people who have taken their time and energy to either appear online or appear in a committee. And I think that's something we all need to take very seriously and to be a part of whatever solution we can come up with, because we're never going to get anywhere by treating each other in the ways that some of us were treated or were treating folks during this session.
Thanks, Marcia. And sort of continuing on that theme of civility, you know, Sara, you served in the House, and so I think you have a unique perspective on, you know, how things have changed. Would you be willing to sort of talk about that?
Yeah, and I appreciate having the opportunity to sort of speak on what I've seen as the ebb and flow of civility and how it lands, particularly because I just hope that we'll all sort of reflect this in how we talk about it, that there's a really good conversation to be had about civility, what creates it, like how we hold each other accountable to it, how we can commit to it ourselves, which means being, you know, pretty tough on ourselves in terms of like, how do I speak about my opposition? And like, if I have, you know, told myself in my own mind that they are trash, or they are, you know, some vermin, or, you know, some other language, like getting really clear on like, that's where genocides always start. Like when you dehumanize someone to that level, and I don't care what side you're on, like it's not a left or a right issue, whatever side of whatever party, if you cannot commit in your own mind to not dehumanizing your opposition, to holding that space for their shared humanity with you, then you can't expect to have civility come out of your mouth. And that's hard work to do when, like I said before, it feels like the stakes are so high, but it's necessary. We all need to commit to doing it. And I think that's a super important conversation to have, civility and what we've seen as sort of the degradation of it, and some members who just don't hold themselves to that same standard. And then on the other side of the ledger, which I don't think is a conversation that belongs with civility or lack thereof, are death threats, which I think, you know, it's been pretty widely reported that Representative LeBeau, who represents, you know, Fremont County, and myself were on the receiving end from a sitting legislator. And I just think whatever the causes of them are, that, you know, it can't be known to me, whether it's anger or mental illness or any other thing, I don't see them as belonging in a conversation about civility or lack thereof. And I hope that everyone sort of understands that to be a real red line, like a bright red line, and that we all sort of say, I don't care whether we're aligned politically or not. If you say this person should die, then I am going to take steps to make sure that you are not planning on carrying that out, that does not become normalized as acceptable conversation. Because I think that's the part that we all have to play in it. And whether you've had, the folks who are on this Zoom, I don't know what everybody's level of familiarity is with the Wyoming legislature, but I hope that you will have been on the receiving end of people who disagreed strongly with you and treated you as a constituent, as a citizen, as someone who they were obligated by their own conscience and by the rules of this legislature to treat you with that dignity and with that fairness. I hope that you got to experience that. And if you haven't, and if you experience something else, then I hope that you will sort of be part of this conversation to say, yeah, we're going to draw a line there and say that's not acceptable. Because it's not. It's bad for democracy. It's bad for Wyoming. And I do think we're in a moment right now where we're not sure like what door to walk out of, where we're not sure how to respond to that. And so it's going to take all of us to say, well, some things are super clear and let me help you make them clear.
Thank you, Sara. Connie, I see that you have your hand up. Do you want to add to this conversation?
I just wanted to add one quick thought, which is that, of course, I agree with Sara that threatening to kill someone is a bright line, but I would actually also suggest that threatening physical aggression, threatening to be physically aggressive toward, it doesn't have to rise to I'm going to kill you. I actually think that aggression and that kind of thing is in that same basket, that same category. Can't go there. So I just wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate that. And, those of us that followed the session closely are aware that there were some, physical altercations between legislators this year, and leadership did the best they could to work with those. But yeah, it is concerning. Another thing that I found very concerning this year, Tate, was sort of the attack on education. There were the bills that you talked about, CRT. There were the bills that Sara talked about, Senate File 51, and then the amendment with the UW gender studies. Why is this happening?
We could hold an entire one of these and probably a few of these on that. It's a good question. It's something we're seeing at the national level. We're seeing across states, across the United States. There has been a real attack on public education. There is a belief that, I think it runs the gamut, right? That you have some folks who believe that the private market does it better and that we should not be spending, so much money on education, despite the fact that education is one of the most expensive services in any state across the US, and that one of the unique features here is our economies of scale issue. It's unless we get some folks in here, unless we start developing some different economic models, it's going to cost. But the idea is that I think largely what we've seen at this national level, it is the idea that the private market will do it better, and that it's far more effective and it's an efficient, far more efficient system than our public school system. But it fails to take into account, right, like minority students, at-risk students, students with special needs, that, that there's this idea that the dollar should follow the student, no matter where they choose. But it's a lack of understanding that what the difference is between a public and a private good. I think this is something that has been building for a very long time, for decades even. We have seen attacks on public education, and I think that one of the unfortunate circumstances and byproducts of this visceral debate between, to Sara's point, whether it's left or right or however you want to look at that, we have lost the ability as a nation and as a people to really have those dialogues about sound policy, right? Like it becomes about these really flashpoint talking points instead of really examining a policy for its merits. It's, what gets the likes, what gets the hits, what gets people riled up. And I think we've seen that within the state of Wyoming. I think we see that at the national level. And until we really figure out how to get back to having those dialogues, that moderate, pragmatic approach to policy, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's judiciary, whatever the case may be, we're going to be stuck in this very visceral rut of pitting one side against the other. And that's not Wyoming politics. I mean, it shouldn't be, at least. I think we've had some very pragmatic, moderate representatives and senators, and I would like to see us get back to that point. But I wish I could answer why folks feel that it's a necessity to attack public education. You know, I know here in the state of Wyoming, a lot of it is focused around this faulty rhetoric around, well, the cost, and we can find deficiencies, and there's just a really big, broad misunderstanding of how education works in the state of Wyoming and what's actually going on. So I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. Thank you. Another interesting aspect, I think, of this state is this sort of, you know, push and pull between conservation and extraction, minerals and coal, and the fact that, you know, 3 of the bills that you mentioned, Connie, were related to mineral extraction taxes and coal severance. Can you tell us why this is a continuing conversation and when it might turn?
Sure. Again, I think this is a topic that we could spend a whole program on, but, you know, we all know that Wyoming is so economically dependent on minerals, on extractive industries, and has been for many years now. And we're used to that. Our whole tax structure is built right now to take advantage of that. And until we are able to really start having open and honest conversations without degenerating into picking corners and shouting at each other about taxes and tax structure, we're not going to get very far, honestly, because as minerals diminish, which they are and they will continue to, that's happening as a result of forces outside of this state that we have no control over. And it will continue. There's no question about that. But where we are right now is that we can either choose to start having those difficult conversations about what kind of economic structure do we want, what will work for us that will help us get where we want to be 10 or 20 years from now, and then start implementing, start taking steps towards moving in that direction. As difficult as it's going to be, it will be far worse if we do what we're doing now, which is stay in denial and just pretend like it's not happening. So somehow we need to break down this barrier that exists today where we can't even talk about taxes without getting into a fight instantly. And that I don't have the answers, but I do know that this transition that faces us is inevitable, and we can either work hard, starting now to make it better, or we can stand by and it will be worse. So that's what, I mean, we're at a real choice point, and this is totally relevant to the education funding discussion and everything else that we're talking about here.
No, I agree, and thank you. So we are getting close to at the end of our time together. If the audience has any questions, please post those in the chat or the Q&A. And I am going to throw a surprise question at these panelists tonight, and I'm going to give them a second to think about it while I talk about some of the ESPC issues. But early in the session, we had a legislator propose legislation that would have renamed one of Wyoming's highways after former President Donald J. Trump. Most of us got kind of a kick out of it. The bill didn't go anywhere. But I'm going to ask each of our panelists, if you got to rename a highway in Wyoming, what would it be? So while they think about that for a minute, I'm going to talk about redistricting. Redistricting happened this year. It is an issue that ESPC advocated quite a bit on, and we will continue to advocate for an independent redistricting commission. There was an op-ed that I wrote today in WyoFile. So if you have any interest in our take on the process, please visit the WyoFile website and take a read at that. We also were thrilled that runoff elections was killed early in the sessions, and then later in the session, crossover voting also was killed. Those were two issues that would have made it harder to vote in Wyoming. Already Wyoming is not the easiest state to vote in, and we need more folks to vote. So we will continue to work on those bills. And so I'm gonna start with Sara.
Lisbird Highway. Done. It's great.
All right, Tate, you're next.
Oh man, there's so many places I could go with this, but just because it's apropos, I'm going to go the Kerouac Highway.
Marcia, how about you?
Oh, I was thinking, I didn't hear what you said, Sara, so I might be duplicative.
No, I went to lobby, yo.
Oh, you're gonna lobby me?
Yeah. The Senator Lisbird Highway.
Oh, I'll go with Lisbird. Yeah, I definitely will.
See, that's successful lobbying right there.
Yeah, you did an excellent
Tate,
job.
where are you at?
And finally, Connie.
So I wasn't even thinking along those lines, but I love that. And so I'm going to jump on board. I mean, I think we should do it. Go for it.
I do too.
You guys, I see some future legislation being introduced right here on PR Live. So all you folks, you saw it here
Representative
first.
Schwartz is on here. Are you ready for this, Andy?
Well, I'm going to give the audience a little bit of time here to ask any last question. Anybody, any questions on the session? All right, well, thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Celeste to close it out.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us. It was a really good conversation. I think there's a million points in my brain and I'm gonna go Google some things. So with that, I'd just like to remind everyone that ESPC is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And with that, we rely on charitable gifts to fund all of our work. So donations can be made at equalitystate.org or by emailing a check to 419 South 5th Street, Laramie, Wyoming, 82072. The address is on our website as well. And again, you can email me if you'd like to join our Leadership Circle donors, Marcia Constell and Joe Albright, Mike Shanzi and Kathy Jenkins, Joanne Skyam True, and Shane True, and an anonymous donor. Our thanks to everyone for making the night possible. And thank you for joining us. Our next People's Review Live will be on April 28th to discuss just transitions in Wyoming.
One last thing, my mom is on here tonight. So hi, Mom. I love you.
Hi, Jen's mom.
Jen's mom, we love your daughter.
Yeah,
always
we're
looks
so
this
happy
good
to
and
work
brown.
with her.
All right, we'll see you next month. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.